Okay. All right. It's good to see everyone today on this rainy day, even though we need the rain. It's kind of dreary outside, but April showers bring May flowers, they say. Nothing like getting the April showers in under the wire. We're starting with chapter 11 in Joshua. So we're on page 62, either in the old one or the new one. And we'll look at ancient Israel as well. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shekidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So chapter 10 had us see Joshua and Israel defeat lots of Canaanite kings pretty quickly and summarily. And I read ahead, and we're going to see the same thing here in chapter 11. So, Vayehi kishmoa Yavin melech Chatzor, Vayishlach el Yovav melech Madon, ve'el melech Shimron, ve'el melech Achshaf. So when Yavin, the king of Chatzor, heard, he sent to Yovav, king of Madon, and to the king of Shimron, and the king of Achshaf. Chatzor I've heard of. It's in the north. Major archaeological dig there. It was a major Canaanite city. I'm just looking at the maps in the back of Eitz Chaim just to see exactly where Chatzor is. Yeah. Oh, there's Madon. Where are you? I'm looking near the Jordan River. Oh, there's Chatzor. It's nice and big. So if you have Eitz Chaim with you, the third map has Israel in Canaan, Joshua to Samuel and Saul, and Chatzor is nice and big, right above the Sea of Galilee. Okay, so remember, it's kind of hard to see on this map. So they're camped around here. And Chatzor is all the way up here. Okay, so that's a long way for word to travel. And for Chatzor then to reach out to one of the towns there was Merom. So it's over here a little bit. So the towns around there, Chatzor again. If you ever go back to Israel and you want to go to major archaeological places, Chatzor is one of those places. Okay, so the king of Chatzor, Yovav, I think his name was, Yavin, reached out to neighboring towns, verse 2, Ve'el ha'melachim asher mitzfon, Bahar uva'arava negev kinrot, uvashpela uvinafot dor miyam. So the Hebrew is a little bit tricky here. So he reached out to these guys in verse 1 and verse 2, and to the kings that were on the north in the hill country. Right, so this is just north of the Sea of Galilee. So it's like it's the Golan in the Galilee, and in the Arava south of Kinrot. I have no idea where that is, and in the lowland, the Shpelas, like the coastal plain, and in the regions of Dor on the west. I have no idea where these are, but if it's around Chatzor, it's all from Chatzor maybe all the way to Haifa. If you can, as the crow flies.
Jonah?
Yes, Bess.
So Chatzor is an Israeli name?
I'm not sure. That's a good question. It could be a Canaanite name that became in use in Hebrew. I mean, there are place names. There are lots of place names that are used in Israel today that aren't necessarily Hebrew in origin.
Sounds like the rock. It sounds like the rock, Chatzor.
Oh no, but it's a chet, Chatzor. Okay, So, and the rock, that would be Sur, with a Vav with a dot next to it. This is Vav with a dot on top of it. So it's Chatzor, not Chatzur. Okay, but anyway, I don't know about the what language it came from, but I know Chatzor is an ancient city that predates, clearly it predates the Israelites coming in to the land of Israel, but I don't know if it was around in the time of Abraham or not. But I think archaeological discoveries show it goes way back.
So are there other cities? Are there other cities in Israel that maintain, or in the area that maintain, the original Canaanite or Hittite or any name?
Well, Shechem goes back a long way. Jericho goes back a long way. I don't know what language those cities get their names from. I don't know if it's Hebrew or not. Maybe they've changed a little bit to reflect a more Hebrew language kind of. And so I don't know. It's like would it be the same thing as some rivers and towns in America having Native American place names, and he changed them a little bit in pronunciation, because who knows if we're pronouncing it right? I really don't know. You could Google Hazor to see the Wikipedia article if it explains what language it's from and how old it is. So I don't know offhand. Barry,
isn't the Arava the southern desert?
So that's the thing. That's tricky here, because Arava in on the map today in Israel is the Jordan, is the valley that's below the Dead Sea that goes all the way to Eilat. So that's considered the Arava. Here, I'm not sure. It also mentions Negev, but I think Negev here in verse 2 means it's a compass direction as opposed to a place. So sometimes Negev is used in the Bible as meaning south, as opposed to meaning the Negev desert. So, but I don't know if Arava, here, because it doesn't make sense. Why would Chatzor reach out when he's north of the Sea of Galilee, all the way below the Dead Sea? That doesn't seem to make sense, because it seems like Joshua already took care of that area with defeating all the kings and places that were around there already. So,
but if he was a king that didn't get that didn't do battle, and
yes,
the other one is trying to make a confederation, knowing
right.
what's about.
So the confederation makes sense where he is north of the Sea of Galilee. So that's the next area that Joshua needs to go to. So in terms of conquering the land of Israel. So that confederation makes sense, but using these names, Negev and Arava, is kind of confusing.
What about the kings' names? Are there any other references to those names not biblical?
So I don't know. And we'll see if the commentary mentions that. I really don't know. So it's not until later in the Bible that we have names of, like, the Assyrian king and general who attacked Israel and defeated it and sent it into exile in the 700s BCE, that we have corresponding contemporary sources to prove. So I'm sorry. I'm trying to turn this off. When my iPhone is next to my Mac, FaceTime rings on the computer. So I'm sorry about that. Just one sec. It was just my son calling. Okay. So, Barry, what did you ask?
We forgot.
You answered if there were any non-biblical references to these kings' names.
Right. I was talking about the Assyrians, and there's references to in Assyrian sources to the same names of the king in general, like Sennacherib was the king or the general who defeated the northern kingdom of Israel at that time. That we know those people existed. We know Nebuchadnezzar existed from Babylonia. We know Darius, Cyrus. These people existed. But the time of Joshua, that I'm not sure we have evidence, contemporary evidence, non-Israelite, to prove this. Okay, verse 3. I just want to go through verse 5, and then we'll look at the commentary on all the verses. HaKana'ani mimizrach umiyam, v'ha'emori v'ha'chiti v'ha'prizi v'ha'yevusi bahar, v'ha'chivi tachat Hermon be'eretz hamitzpah. The Canaanite to the east and to the west, the Amorite, the Hivites, the Perizzites, the Jebusites in the mountains or in the hill country, and the Hivites under Hermon. So Mount Hermon. So this makes sense in this area because Chatzor, again, north of the Sea of Galilee, and on this map that's there in the Eitz Chaim, there's still like another lake there, of the Hula Valley. So if you go to Israel today, they kind of tried to the kibbutzniks 100 years ago drained that lake because it was mosquitoes and filled with malaria. So they planted all the eucalyptus trees to drain that swampy area. But now the Israel Parks Authority has reclaimed that area, and it's a major refuge and stop for birds from Africa to Europe. So the lake is there again. And north of that and to the east is Mount Hermon, the tallest mountain in all of Israel on the border with Syria. So the king of Chatzor is making a confederation with all of these people all around in that area, all the way up to the Hermon, Be'eretz HaMitzpah, in the land of Mitzpah. So what is Mitzpah? I don't know. Mitzpah is also like Har Hatzofim, Mount Scopus. It's the same word, so an overlook. So in the overlook area. So I don't know, is that the Golan Heights? Maybe. Vayetzuhem v'chol machanehem imam amrav kachol asher asfatayam larov v'sus v'rechev rav ma'od. So they went, and all of the camp with them, a huge amount of people, like the sand on the shore of the sea, in multitude, with horses and chariots, with a lot of horses and chariots. Okay, so a great army, a confederated army, is coming together to attack Joshua and the people of Israel. 5, Vayiva'adu kol hamelachim ha'eleh, Vayava'u vayachanu yachdav el mei Merom lehilachem im Yisrael. And all these kings gathered together or met together, and they came and camped together at the waters of Merom. So there are like these rivers, in air quotes, streams that lead into the Jordan River. So on one of these streams, that's where they met in order to prepare to fight with Israel. So let's look at the commentary here. I'll look at the commentary in the new edition. Yabin, king of Chatzor, bottom of 62. He took the lead because his kingdom was preeminent. Another Yavin is mentioned in Judges 4, described as king of Canaan that reigned in Chatzor. It has been suggested that Yavin, meaning perhaps the intelligent, may have been a generic title of the kings of Chatzor, like Pharaoh for the kings of Egypt. Okay, so we don't know what language they speak in Chatzor, don't know. So is Yavin a Semitic language, Canaanite language term for king? Oh, that's just the guess. Chatzor, its location was near Kedesh Naphtali and Lake Hula in the extreme north. All right, I showed you on the map where it was. Madon, a few miles west of the Sea of Kinneret, it's mentioned again only in chapter 12. Shimron, about 20 miles west of the southern end of the Sea of Kinneret, assigned to Zebulun, known today as Tel Simunia. Achshaf, a few miles northwest of Shimron, part of the territory of Asher. You see, starting in the next chapter, the Israelites are going to start to settle in the land according to their tribes. And I think it's going to say there, what are the place names that are incorporated into those tribal territories. The hill country, the district of Galilee is intended. The Arava south of Kinnerot, the Jordan Valley south of the Sea of Gennesaret. The town of Kinneret, whose site is unknown, supplied the earlier name for the lake, which is later called the Sea of Galilee. So this could be the old way to refer to this town from which the sea gets its name. So in Hebrew, it's called the Kinneret, but maybe it's Kinrot was the first town there. And it mentions here Gennesaret. So there's a kibbutz Ginosar that's around there also that maybe takes its name from this ancient village that was there. Anyway, it's the southern part of the Sea of Galilee today, like around Tiberias in that area. The lowland, that is the coastal region north of Carmel. The regions of Dor, a Phoenician coastal settlement between Carmel and Caesarea. So Caesarea today is south of Haifa. Okay, and this was they're saying the commentary here is saying about the lowland that's the area north of Haifa. So that would be like the town of Akko is north of Haifa. So that area and to the east of it. Okay, but we're just guessing here because I'm not sure exactly if anybody knows exactly where these place names are. Verse 3, for the people enumerated in the verse, see on chapter 3, verse 10, the Canaanites, that etc. Yabin appealed to them as racial entities, although they were divided nationally, not ethnically. Hermon, the eastern portion of the anti-Lebanon range. The land of Mitzpah, Mount Hermon, and the neighboring hill in the northern part of Upper Galilee command a view of the entire surrounding region, thus the name Mitzpah, meaning lookout.
But what's an
What'd you say?
Anti-Lebanon range?
I mean, before it. Not
ANTE.
Yeah, well, maybe. There's something like that, yeah. Kimchi maintains that after this mightiest of all Joshua's wars against the Northern Alliance, an altar and a house of prayer and assembly were built in commemoration of the successful waging of this war. See also Judges 11 and Samuel 7. Okay.
Jonah?
Yes, Ben.
I'm on the older book, and I don't know if you skipped it or it doesn't have it or it's out of order, because sometimes they are. But it says, for the peoples enumerated in the verse, the Hittites of Lebanon in the Old Testament are, as far as we can judge, Semites of the Palestinian rather than of the Aramaean branch of the race.
Right, I see that.
I don't know if
I don't know. I don't know if we ever know who the Hittites are.
Well, I think it's interesting though that they call it the Old Testament. I mean, that's
because they're quoting this non-Jewish author named Moore. Okay. Yeah. So, but who these Hittites are, we don't know. There's something.
My question was about the term Old Testament. I didn't understand. Right. Okay, right.
No, because it's a quote from. That's why.
There were no Palestinians either. Racially.
Well, that whole area is called Palestine just because Rome referred it to Palestine. So all through
Israel,
from,
Israel
Yeah.
could have been named Palestine. It was a consideration. Yeah, I
Right.
understand that, but they were talking about it as a race,
right.
branch of the race.
Right,
War was.
so race determined by what language you speak, and so this is the branch, like there are Syrian Arabs, there are Egyptian Arabs, there are Lebanese Arabs, Jordanian Arabs, all they're Arabic. It's the same language, but they have different dialects. So maybe that's just, for the Semitic language spoken, there's the Aramean branch, and then there's the Palestinian branch. So, okay. 4, even as the sand in multitude. Josephus gives their combined forces as amounting to 300,000 infantry, 10,000 cavalry, and 20,000 war chariots. I'll just say Josephus had no idea. Okay, Josephus made up, even though he's in quotations an historian, some of it he makes up. Okay, so in his so-called in his Antiquities, which is just a Jewish history that he wrote up to his time, which is around the time of Jesus, and to the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. Like his account of Masada, where did he get that from? Right? He said 2 women escaped after everybody committed suicide. How's he know? We don't. He just made it up. But until Yigal Yadin found potsherds with names on them, and one of the names was the name of a guy that Josephus said was the head of all of them. So okay, so maybe Yigal Yadin and digging up in Masada can prove that Josephus was right. I'm just saying, as part of the story was made up. We don't know how much of Josephus is accurate. So the commentary goes on. Even if these figures are exaggerated, the text evidences the enlarged scope of the alliance against Israel. Apparently, the sense of unity grew among the threatened inhabitants. Right. So if the book is accurate, like how devastatingly quick Joshua is able to defeat all these other Canaanites and totally annihilate them, you can understand why these other kings are uniting to try to withstand the force. With horses and chariots very many, this military equipment makes the victory of the Israelites who had only infantry the more remarkable. The waters of Merom, usually identified with Lake Hula, the most northern of the 3 lakes in the Jordan Valley. It's called the Lake of Semachanitis by Josephus, perhaps to be identified with Samki in the Talmud. We don't know, but if it's Lake Hula, it's the Hula Valley, and like I said, it's what is there today as this refuge and national park in Israel. So now I'm switching to Alter's Ancient Israel, page 55 below the line. When Yavin, king of Chatzor, heard. Though no grammatical object for the verb appears, the obvious sense is that he heard of Joshua's initial conquests. The pointed parallel with chapter 10, verse 1 makes this clear. Altogether, this whole chapter appears to have been composed to create a symmetrical complement to the account of the defeat of the Southern Alliance in the previous chapter. Here, the alliance is one of northern kings. The reach of this new conquest, going all the way to Sidon in Lebanon and to the south on the Mediterranean coast to Misrafot Mayim, is scarcely historical, and it seems devised to convey the idea of the completeness of the conquest of the land. Chatzor, this was an important city in northeastern Canaan in the Middle Bronze Age, a memory perhaps reflected in making its king the leader of the alliance, but by Joshua's time it had become a relatively small town. Okay, again, just Google Chatzor, the Wikipedia article, whatever comes up, you'll get a sense of how important Chatzor was at this time and before. He wrote, what?
I did it. It said 27th, 28th centuries BCE.
Oh, it goes way back.
Yeah, that
Right.
was surprising that they
Yeah.
know that.
Keen wrote, this is the same place as Kinneret, the Sea of Galilee. Hermon, this is a mountain to the northeast on the border between present-day Israel and Syria. The waters of Merom, the location is in the high country of north-central Canaan. Okay, so let's go on. I'll read, let's see, 6 to 9. Vayomer Adonai El Yehoshua, Al tira mitnehem, ki machar ka'et hazot, anochi notene kulam chalalim lifnei Yisrael, et susehem te'aker, ve'et markevotehem tisrof ba'esh. God said to Joshua, don't be afraid of them, because tomorrow at this time, I'm going to give all of them dead before you. Their horses you will, Hough. What is that? You will how their horses? How do in altar it's you will hamstring their horses.
Cut the tendon, it says here.
Oh, cut the tendon? Okay. Yeah, so cut their legs. Okay.
So they can't run away.
Right. And their chariots you'll burn with fire. Vayavo Yehoshua, v'chol am hamilchama imo aleihem, al mei merom pitom, vayiplu bahem. So Joshua and all of the warriors with him came to them at the waters of Merom suddenly and fell upon them. Verse 8, Vayitneim Adonai biyad Yisrael vayakum vayirdefum ad Sidon Rabbah v'ad Misrafot Mayim v'ad Bikat Mitzpeh Mizracha vayakum ad Bilti Hishir lahem Sarid. So God gave them into the hand of Israel, and they slew them and pursued them until greater Sidon. So that's in Lebanon today. And to Misrafot Mayim, wherever that is, and to Bikat Mitzpeh in the east, wherever that is. And he slayed them until not one remained. 9, Vaya'as lahem Yehoshua ka'asher amar lo Adonai et susehem iker ve'et markavotehem saraf ba'esh. And Joshua did to them as God told him. He hamstrung their horses. You will wonder, these horses are pretty valuable. Why didn't he keep the horses? But he hamstrung the horses and he burned the chariots with fire.
They're usable. They're usable.
They would have been usable. Exactly.
They are. They can
Right.
plow. They can walk.
Sure, I agree with you. I don't know why. It's not like conquering Russia, and you have to have you have to understand how the MiGs fly and the tanks work, which could be different than how your tanks work. This is pretty straightforward. You hook up a horse to a chariot, it's pretty easy. So anyway, what's wrong with the horses and that we couldn't use them? I don't know. But let's look at the commentary.
One fast question. I forgot this. Joshua has 3,000, 30,000. How many men does he have?
We don't know.
Because
It
this
doesn't say.
is the third of 1,000,000 men.
Okay, that's only if you believe Josephus, and we shouldn't believe Josephus. We really shouldn't. What we should believe is that it's one against all this confederation of kings, and what we're supposed to believe is the miracle that God gave the enemy into Israel's hand, and we're able to manage it. It's still, this is a people who none of them except Joshua remembers Egypt. They're all born in the desert. What kind of training did they have wandering the desert? Now, they did defeat Sihon and Og, that the book of Numbers talks about. So somehow they learned how to fight. But perhaps they didn't have to learn how to fight. They just made weapons and God taught them, or made it easy for them because God gave the enemy into Israel's hands. So the same thing is happening here. So if you want to read this as history, it's a problem. because there's a lot of gaps in the story and nothing to teach us about how they learned. And I think the point is
God did it.
that this is a religious text, not a history text, and it's all about how because of God, Joshua and the people were able to defeat this seemingly mighty enemy.
Isn't this sort of an extension of the 10 plagues story, a sort of a modern version of that? Because not only did God cause Pharaoh's heart to be hardened, here he's also he's making the miracles that would not normally work, but at the same time he's also making these kings. If he is in control, if he is the omnipotent,
but
God,
we already know in the Torah that there are Canaanite people living there.
right?
And God says, when you get into the land of Israel, you're going to be able, you need to totally annihilate them, and I'll be there for you to make it happen. So you just have to follow the covenant and believe in me. So here Joshua's following, and here we have religious proof that it's happening.
Right.
But did it really happen? We don't know. But that's not the point. We're not supposed to ask if this really happened. We're supposed to understand this is ancient religious Jewish history.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying. I mean, it's this sense
And
of
so
this is the story that is
example,
written.
like you're saying, of God intervening and making miracles happen for us. Yeah. Okay, so let's look at the commentary below. Be not afraid because of them. This coalition, larger even than that of the 5 kings in the preceding chapter, called forth God's reassurance. Howl their horses. I don't know if that's, or huff their horses. How do you pronounce? Is that the O-U-T-H of uff? Or is it owl, like in bow? I don't know. That is, cut the tendon of the joint of the hind leg. The practice does not seem to have been unusual, its purpose being to make them unfit as war horses and employable only for domestic occupations. So that's okay. So maybe they did use them afterwards, but not for war. Kimchi offers the reason that the Israelites might not use them in war, and so rely upon their military strength rather than upon God. That's okay. So my question, why didn't they keep the horses and the chariots, is that if they did, then they would think more about themselves and their power as opposed to God giving the enemy into their hands. Okay, so that Kimchi helps us understand that. They were to remember that a horse is a vain thing for safety from Psalms, and salvation belongs unto the Lord. Right. Great Sidon, Zidon, mentioned again in 19 and distinguished from a smaller city of that name. It was situated on the coast north of Tyre. Misrafot Maim, a coastal town a few miles south of Tyre, named again in chapter 13. The name signifies the burnings of the waters and may probably refer to smelting pits. Rashi explains it as salt pans formed by letting the seawater into basins. The water evaporated by the sun, leaving a deposit of salt. Okay, who knows? Who knows? And that's it for the commentary on 6 to 9. And yeah, let's look at Alter on this. They're on page 56. Their horses you will hamstring, and their chariots you will burn in fire. The chariot, a formidable instrument of warfare, was not generally adopted by the Israelites, who were essentially guerrilla fighters from the high country for another 2 centuries. These Canaanite chariots, in all likelihood, were made out of wood, hence the burning. As to hamstringing of the horses, Bowling and others think this was a cunning strategy to disable the horses at the onset of the battle, though it's not entirely clear how easy it would have been for the Israelite warriors to get close enough to the chariots in order to maim the horses. Alternately, they might have hamstrung the horses after the victory in order to make sure they would not be used again to draw chariots, a possibility encouraged by the previous verse in which the enemy troops appear to be defeated before the hamstringing. came against them suddenly at the waters of Merom. This is the same strategy of surprise attack used against the Southern Alliance, with the enemy caught unawares at its own encampment. Okay, let's go on. 10 through 20. Well, actually, let's just finish the chapter. 10 through 23. Vayashov Yehoshua ba'etahi vayilkod et Chatzor ve'et Malka hika becharev ki Chatzor lefanim hi rosh kol hamamlachot ha'ela. So Joshua returned at that time and took Chatzor and its king he slew by the sword, because Chatzor beforehand was the chief of all the these kingdoms. Vayaku et kol hanefesh asher ba lefi cherev hacharem lo notar kol neshama ve'et Chatzor saraf ba'esh. So he slew all the people that were in it by the sword and annihilated them. He didn't leave a person alive, and Chatzor he burned by fire. Et kol arei hamelachim ha'eleh ve'et kol machehem lachad Yehoshua vayakem lefi cherev hecherim otam ka'asher tziva Moshe eved Adonai. And all the cities of these kings and all their kings Joshua took and slew by the sword and annihilated them, as was commanded, as Moses, the servant of God, commanded. Right? So according to Deuteronomy, where the commandment was, Joshua was following that commandment.
Women and children too.
That's what we assume. Rak kol ha'arim ha'omdot al tilam lo sarafam Yisrael, zulati et Chatzor levada saraf Yehoshua. But the cities that stood on their mounds, Israel did not burn, except for Chatzor alone, Joshua burned. V'chol shalal ha'arim ha'eleh v'habehema bazazu lahem b'nei Yisrael raket kol ha'adam hiku lefi cherev ad hishmidam otam lo hishiru kol neshama. And all of the loot of these cities and the cattle they took, the people of Israel took, only all the people did they slay by the sword until they destroyed them. They didn't leave one person alive. So neshama neshama in modern Hebrew is a soul. In biblical Hebrew, it's the breath. So it didn't leave anybody breathing.
It's interesting the translation says man. In other words,
Adam. Yes, well, see, I'm translating it in an egalitarian way, but Adam literally does mean man. But I think Adam can also in the Bible mean is as gender neutral a term as you can get in Hebrew, because you can't say people. Gender neutrally person. That word does not exist in Hebrew, or the method for saying something gender neutral is impossible in Hebrew. Kasher tziva Adonai et Moshe avdo, kain tziva Moshe et Yehoshua, v'chein asa Yehoshua lo hesir davar mikol asher tziva Adonai et Moshe. As God commanded Moses his servant, so Moses commanded Joshua, and so did Joshua do. He did not leave out a thing from all that God commanded Moses. Vayikach Yehoshua et kol haaretz hazot, hahar et kol hanegev, ve'et kol eretz hagoshen, ve'et hashpela, ve'et ha'arava, ve'et har Yisrael u'shpelato. So Joshua took all this land, the mountain, the south, or the Negev, all of the land of Goshen, which is it's confusing because the land of Goshen, we think of Egypt, where the Israelites were in Egypt, but it's some other area in the land of Israel, and the coastal plain, and the Arava, the Rift Valley south of the Dead Sea, and all of the hills of Israel and its lowland. Min hahar hechalak ha'oleh seir ve'ad Baal Gad bevik'at halevanon tachat har Hermon ve'et kol machehem lachad v'yakem v'yemitem. So from the smooth mountain or the bare mountain that goes up to Seir until even up to Baal Gad in the valley of Lebanon under the Hermon mountain, and all their kings he took and slew and killed them. Yamim Rabim Asa Yehoshua et Kol HaMelachim Ha'ela Milchama. He waged Joshua waged war with all these kings for a long time, for many days. Lo hayata ir asher hishlima et bnei Yisrael bilti hachivi yoshvei givon et hakol lakhu b'milchama. There wasn't a city that made peace with the children of Israel, except for, remember, the Hivites who are living in Gibeon. Everything they took in war. Kime et Adonai hayata lechazek et libam likrat hamilchama et Yisrael lama'an hacharimam levilti hayot lahem techina ki lama'an hashmidam ka'asher tziva Adonai et Moshe. Because from God was this, to strengthen to harden their hearts before the war with Israel, in order for them to be annihilated, without them to be shown any favor, because in order to destroy them as God commanded Moses. Right, so that's why they didn't make peace with them, because the king's hearts were hardened. That's another Egyptian reference, Barry, like to the plagues. So these kings' hearts were hardened by God to make it that much easier for Israel to totally annihilate them and not make peace with them. Vayavo Yehoshua ba'etahi vayachret et ha'anakim min hahar min Chevron min Devir min Anav umikol har Yehuda umikol har Yisrael im arehem hecherimam Yehoshua. And Joshua at that time cut off the Anakim, which literally means giants, but we'll get to the commentary to figure out who these people are. So the Anakim from the mountain, from Chevron, from Devir, from Anav, and from all the mountains of Judah, and from all the mountains of Israel, with their cities, Joshua annihilated. Lo notar Anakim be'eretz b'nei Yisrael, rak ba'aza, begat, uva-ashdod nisharu. So Anakim weren't left behind in the land of the people of Israel. Only in Gaza and in Gat and in Ashdod were the Anakim left. Vayikach Yehoshua et kol haaretz kechol asher diber Adonai el Moshe vayitna Yehoshua l'nachala Yisrael kemachalakotam l'shiftehem va'aretz shakta mimilchama. Joshua took all the land as according to what God spoke to Moses, and was given to Joshua as a heritage for all of Israel, as it was divided up according to their tribes, and the land was quiet from war. Okay, so let's look at the commentary on all of this from verse 10. And Joshua turned back. That is, Joshua hastened at that time to take Chatzor before they became aware of the details of the battles and be alerted. And took Chatzor, the survivors fled to Charoshet Goyim, where they reestablished their kingdom. See Judges 4. So if they were totally annihilated, who was left in order to go? Right, so that's the question. So they weren't totally annihilated, but even though it seemed like they totally were. The head of all those kingdoms, it's not clear whether the text is to be understood that Chatzor exercised authority over other kingdoms, or simply that his realm was the most important. As Moses commanded, see Deuteronomy 7 and also Deuteronomy 20. That stood in their mounds, Jonathan renders, that stood in their strength, that is, whose walls are not destroyed like those of Jericho and Ai. So that, in other words, Jonathan is the Aramaic translation of this part of the Bible, as opposed to Onkelos, we remember from the Torah. And Rashi and Kimchi are referring to Aramaic translation, saying not on their mounds, but rather their walls. Mitsudot renders that stood at their height, explaining it in like manner. Right, so the old commentary suggests it was a common practice to rebuild a town on its original site. And when this was done, the reconstructed city was strongly fortified by a surrounding wall. These places, less open to attack, were not destroyed by Joshua, since they would be required for the settlement of the Israelites. Okay. Save Chatzor only. Joshua made this exception, perhaps because the king of Chatzor had instigated the coalition against him. Alternatively, he burnt it because all the nations gathered there to wage war against Israel, because all the refugees from the allied cities were hidden there, or simply because Moses had transmitted instructions to Joshua to burn it, giving no reason. So, okay. The land of Goshen, see on chapter 10, verse 41. The Arava, the Jordan Valley from the Sea of Kinneret to the Dead Sea. So it's that part, not below the Dead Sea. The hill country of Israel, the mountainous region around Samaria. The Bear Mountain near Kadesh Barnea in the southwest. This is the opinion of most archaeologists. Da'at Mikra, however, believes that it is further south. It was given this name because of its lack of vegetation. Seir in the southeast. Baal Gad, so called because it was the site of a shrine to the cult of God, the god of fortune, mentioned again in chapter 12 and 13. A long time, 7 years, according to the rabbis. That's how long this war took, according to the rabbis. To harden their hearts, their opposition is attributed to God as serving his purpose, explained in the next verse, that they might have no favor. If they had submitted without a fight, the Israelites might have treated them with leniency and not destroyed them. In that event, they would have been a menace to the community, seducing them to heathenism. The Anakim, the giants, the sight of whom had struck terror in the hearts of the spies sent by Moses in Numbers chapter 12. Although Caleb led the drive against Hebron and Othniel conquered Devir, these campaigns were under the overall leadership of Joshua. Ralbag in Judges 1 maintains that Devir mentioned in Judges is distinct from this one. So, right. Devir, see on chapter 10:38, Anav between Hebron and Beersheba. The name is still found near to Devir, 14 miles southwest of Hebron. The hill country of Judah, the hill country of Israel. That is, the hill countries that were later known by these names. When the book was written, Judah's territory was known as well as the territories of the other tribes. Right, so in other words, why is there a reference to Judah now when we haven't distributed the land to Judah? Well, because this was written already when the land was apportioned. Gaza, etc., 3 of the 5 principal cities of the Philistines, Goliath belonged to God. The whole land, that is, the land as a whole, though many regions remained in Canaanite hands, according to their divisions as determined by Lot. The land had rest from war, organized and united resistance was at an end, but local opposition continued for a long time. The phrase is repeated in chapter 14.
We know where Gath is?
Yeah, there's a Kiryat Gat today in modern Israel. So it's between, as the crow flies, it's from Jerusalem southwest to Ashkelon. So about 20 miles before you get to Ashkelon is Gat. So it's in that area, Ashdod, Ashkelon, Gaza, that part of Israel that really wasn't part of Israel. And when the rabbis determined the borders of Israel for the agricultural laws, they did not include the Philistine territory of Gaza, Ashkelon, and that area. So it's important for discussion about what land you can give up to make peace with the Palestinians. If it's not part of the land of Israel for agricultural law, then maybe there's room to concede that territory if you need to. Okay, so let's go back to altar. This is the bottom of 56, verse 11. Living person, breathing person. The two Hebrew terms, nefesh and neshama, are phonetically and semantically related. Nefesh is the life breath, and by extension, the living person. Neshama explicitly means breath or anything that breathes. The towns standing on their mounds. The mound, tel, is the heaped up layers of earlier habitation on which old cities stand. It has become a technical archaeological term. What the expression may mean in context is towns of notable antiquity, though that is not entirely certain. As the Lord had charged Moses, the genocidal imperative is spelled out several times in Deuteronomy. The high country of Israel, this rather odd phrase, matched in verse 21 with the high country of Judah, probably reflects an awareness of the division into a southern and northern kingdom after the death of Solomon. Mount Halak, Bowling wittily and accurately observes that this could be translated as bald mountain. Many days, the Hebrew yamim is an elastic indicator of time, and so it could mean here months or even years. For it was from the Lord to harden their heart for battle against Israel. This is one of two verbs used in the Exodus story for the hardening or toughening of the heart of Pharaoh. There, the divinely instigated obduracy was in order to enable the display of God's overwhelming power. Here, it is to provide grounds for wiping out the indigenous population. The Anakites, though in the present context, this looks like a gentilic designation, in other biblical texts, the word refers to giants. Only in Gaza, in Gat, and in Ashdod do they remain. These are three of the 5 Philistine towns on the southern part of the Mediterranean coast. Goliath the Philistine was, of course, a giant, though the Hebrew Anak is not attached to him in the story in 1 Samuel. It's conceivable that the association of huge physical proportions with the Anakites derives from a perception that the Philistines of original Aegean stock were bigger than the indigenous population of Canaan, though archaeological evidence suggests the Canaanites were also big. The Philistines invaded the coastal areas around 1200 BCE, but later writers, as in Genesis, imagine them as longtime residents of the coastal strip. So it just gets to a debate among scholars where the Philistines came from, how tall they were, and how tall the Canaanites were too. And I guess from archaeological discoveries, you can tell, how tall the rooms were. They have to accommodate the average person's height, right? And maybe they found beds that also accommodated people's heights, and they could tell maybe that Canaanites were taller than the average Israelite.
Maybe they recovered bones.
Yeah, that too. Yes, I'm sure they're skeletons. Yeah, Gesundheit. Okay, we'll stop here. And we'll continue our study of Joshua next week. Hope everybody has a good day. Shabbat shalom, everybody.
Shabbat shalom.